In the wake of the recent conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza, there have been reports from around the world of serious hostility towards Jews. In Britain, a rabbi was attacked near a Jewish boarding school. In France and Germany, synagogues and Jewish community centres have been firebombed, and slogans like "Kill the Jews" have been seen at protests. All this has led to claims that prejudice against Jews is on the rise. Take, for example, the British columnist and author Owen Jones, who wrote in The Guardian that the evidence suggests that anti-Jewish hatred is actually increasing again. But is it? Well, Ruth Alexander's here. Ruth, what does the evidence say?
Well, let's look at the UK first, and let's start with incidents such as violence, threats, graffiti or online abuse. In Britain, the Jewish organisation, the Community Security Trust, monitors this sort of thing, and it says, to give you an idea, it received about 240 reports of anti-Semitic incidents in July, in the middle of the conflict, and that's 5 times what they'd normally expect to see in that month.
And that's a lot, clearly, although we can't say to what extent it's driven by heightened awareness and therefore heightened reporting. Do we see that sort of spike with previous conflicts?
We do. The last major Israeli offensive in Gaza was in 2009, and looking at the UK and other European countries, you can see a short-term spike in anti-Semitic incidents after that.
So that's the short term. What about the longer-term trend?
It is more encouraging. 2013 had the lowest annual number of anti-Semitic incidents in Britain since 2005. During the past decade, the levels have fluctuated, making it difficult to identify a single trend. The number of incidents had steadily declined from a peak in 2009 to the end of 2013, but it is still a little higher than it was 10 years ago.
What about the rest of Europe?
Well, the European Union's Fundamental Rights Agency, or FRA, publishes a report every year which summarises data from governments and other organisations on anti-Semitic incidents. But its spokeswoman, Katja Andrus, says only about half the EU states collect data on this sort of incident.
It is very incomplete. There are huge gaps in the data that's collected at the official level.
So does this collection of official data support the idea that anti-Semitism is on the rise?
Not what we have, is all I can say. I'm not saying it's not on the rise, I'm saying we don't know. The gaps are just too large.
So the data aren't good enough to show what the Europe-wide long-term trend is, but can we draw conclusions about any individual countries here? I'm thinking particularly of France. We hear a lot about anti-Semitism there being bad. There are high-profile incidents, including the killing of a teacher and 3 children at a Jewish school in Toulouse in 2012.
Well, in France and in Germany too, the official data also shows the number of incidents has fluctuated up and down, trending downward in the decade up to 2012, before then rising that year. But in France, the UK and some other countries, you can see that although the numbers go up and down over the past decade, the average level is a fair bit higher than it was in the 1990s. So there appears to have been a step change in the numbers of anti-Semitic incidents around the early 2000s. Nola Meyer is president of the French Political Science Association and a professor at Paris's Sciences Po University.
Actually, since 2000, the beginning of the second Intifada, the revolt of the Palestinians against the Israeli occupation, we've had an explosion, a very clear explosion of actions and threats against people identified as Jews. And every time something goes on in the Middle East after the second Intifada, the numbers, as they are collected by the police, of actions taken against Jews flare up.
So that's actual incidents of anti-Semitism, specific things you can point to. But what about more general attitudes, how people think and feel about Jewish people?
There can be some tricky definitional issues here. Now, there are some things that are clearly anti-Semitic, but what about an individual's criticism of Israel's government policy? That might be motivated by anti-Semitism, or it might not. And this sort of disagreement helps explain why one poll from earlier this year suggests almost 40% of people in France are anti-Semitic, while another suggests the figure is 10%.
So are there any more reliable data out there measuring people's attitudes?
Well, let's return to France, because Nola Meyer from Sciences Po has been running a long-term project surveying people's attitudes to Jews and to other minorities.
We have many surveys, even before 1990. What they show you is a global decline of prejudice towards minorities, and especially towards Jews. Actually, Jews are the better accepted minority in France. But what we also see is that in a context of economic recession, since 2009, prejudice, which was decreasing since World War II, has been going up again, also for the Jews, but the Jews remain the most accepted group in France. And we see the same thing in Europe. Today, the group that people reject, it's Arabs, it's Muslims.
So it's a mixed picture. There's a spike in incidents at the moment, but it's more difficult to see clear evidence of a broad Europe-wide upward trend in anti-Semitism. There is still clearly a level of fear in some parts of the Jewish community.
Well, there definitely is, both in response to current events and over the longer term. The Fundamental Rights Agency of the EU has done a detailed survey of experiences and perceptions of anti-Semitism amongst the Jewish community in 8 European countries. Here's Nonna Meyer again.
It shows that among Jews in Europe today, there's real fright, there's a real anxiety, and more than in any other country, it's the case of France. We have something like more than 85% of the Jews who were interviewed by that survey who say that they have the feeling anti-Semitism is on the rise and they're afraid for themselves and for their children. But I wouldn't put the opinions and the acts at the same level. How many acts of violence? 100 in the year of 2013. So a minority is enough to frighten, to say maybe it's going to happen to me or to my children.
Nonna Meyer. So while the trends are harder to discern, the fact that anti-Semitic incidents happen at the level they do is enough to make some Jewish people feel fearful.